cent.
I was going to say, yeah, for a
Trinket.
5-cent trinket. All right, we're about to go live. All right, we are live. It is Friday, February 16th, 9 a.m. This is the Beach Preservation Ad Hoc Committee. I'd like to call the meeting to order and acknowledge that the press and public were duly notified of the meeting in accordance with the Freedom of Information Act. Our first item is approval of previous meetings minutes from last Friday of February 9th. Any edits or changes or comments?
No.
All good, all right. Next up, Desiree, we're not formally approving minutes, or do you want them?
Yes, please.
All right, so if we can have a motion
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes as presented.
and a second.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Next up is review of beach preservation fee fund. In your packet, you've got a couple of financial pages that staff has put together for us, just again, from a grounding standpoint, to kind of let you know where we are and where we sit currently. So I don't know, Deborah or Douglas or
Now that Desiree's run from the room.
me or-
I can cover that.
Right.
We are currently,
So which page are you on? Which one are you doing first?
we have two of them?
We got
Okay.
3 of them.
Oh, okay. All right, I think the first one is the graph or the tourism schedule.
Okay, the beach preservation fee.
Yes. And year-to-date, we have $914,000. And I don't know what that is compared to year-to-date FY '23, but it looks like it's a little bit less, just looking at the numbers from July to December. And the graph that's on the bottom, that's a little off. I did present a new graph because those numbers are like in the millions, but that's not true on this side. So I presented a new graph. I'm not sure if you got a copy of the new graph yet or not. No. And so we can talk about the budget or what we project to happen in FY '25. If
May
you
I
don't
ask
have
a
any-
question
Sure.
about just the fund in general?
Absolutely.
We don't have any knowledge in this moment of what's coming from behind the gate rentals and what's coming from outside the gate rentals, do we? I mean, I feel like going forward, if we've got publicly inaccessible, we're gonna have some, once we start spending this money, I'd like to know, I'd like to give back as much as possible to the people who are paying in.
Yeah, we did do an exercise maybe a year or two ago for the Accommodations Tax Advisory Committee. They were interested in that to identify what area is generating the most accommodation tax revenue. And we were able to separate it between Wild Dunes and outside of Wild Dunes.
Yeah.
So we can go back and update that with, I
that
think
might
the
be
last time
helpful.
we updated maybe FY '22. So we can go back and produce that for you all.
I mean, just once we start talking about stretches and how we're gonna fund, to know, you know, hey, this is contributed X and.
And if I recall correctly, it's pretty much 50-50, maybe
Yeah.
51% inside the gates and about 49% outside everything else. So we can't be different, but we can provide a more accurate
It's just
numbers.
easier to point to when somebody's coming to you for 17 million to say, hey, 5 came from this and here's your 5 back. And,
And Deborah or Desiree, I want to back up again, just from a level setting standpoint, how this gets funded, how long it's been around, just to make sure whoever's watching, or for our committee members.
Yeah, so the beach preservation fee is a 1% tax that is levied on all sleeping accommodations on the island. So whether it's a hotel or a short-term rental or an Airbnb, everybody who comes stay on the island pays that 1%. The city is allowed by state law to levy essentially 2% municipal accommodations tax. 1% the city has on a separate fund. It's called a municipal accommodation tax fund. By state law, it has to be spent on tourism-related expenditures. A few years ago, the state law authorized municipalities to choose of the 2% that you can levy on municipal accommodations tax to have 1% be dedicated for beach preservation, beach renourishment funding, and that's what the city does. So our beach preservation fee fund is restricted for beach preservation and beach renourishment. The way that the city has spent this money in the past, as you all know, we've done 2 major projects on the north end of the island. The city's cost share has come from this fund. The city has also cost shared shoal management projects, which we're getting ready to do on the north end as well. The city also funds the installation repair of beach walkovers on our 57, 56 community public beach access paths. Just ongoing maintenance on the beach access paths, but that's mainly what this fund has to be used. The city can use municipal accommodations and tax accommodation tax funds as well for beach renourishment, so that could be supplemented by those funds. So that is an option because when you look at the definition in state law, tourism-related expenditures include beach preservation and beach nourishment. So that would be another source that the city can utilize to supplement funds from the beach preservation fee fund for beach projects or beach preservation efforts.
And I guess too, not to get into a whole budget conversation, but we use a lot of those other tourism monies for staffing projects, other things. I mean, it's not all available because the municipal page that looks just like this beach preservation fee is the exact same number, obviously, since it's 1%, so about $1.8 million-ish the last couple of years.
Correct. The city averages about $5 million a year if you look at the last 6 years in tourism-related funds. And when you hear us talk about tourism funds, we are talking about the municipal accommodations tax, which is 1%, the beach preservation fee fund, although that one is much more restrictive than the tourism funds. State accommodations, the state, that's a 2% on all accommodations, and the city gets all of that, and this is the fund where 30% of those need to go for tourism promotion and advertisement, which the Explore Charleston CVB manages for the city. And then we have the hospitality tax fund, that's a tax on all food and bev sold on the island. We also have the local accommodations tax fund and the Charleston County pass-through, which it's roughly about $400,000 a year. So when we say tourism funds, we're talking about all of them, and they help supplement a lot of the city's operations, whether it's city events. We do support an amount of police officers, fire department personnel, capital for both those departments. There's a component of our public works department that is supplemented by the tourism funds. And the reason why is we can clearly show that those 3 operations, particularly, those 3 departments are impacted pretty significantly in the summer because of tourism. So it fits into the description of tourism-related expenditures when you're supplement the city operations for the purpose of providing services for tourists. So, I hear a lot, well, let's just pay with tourism funds. Well, tourism funds are not, we get about $5 million a year, and a lot of it is already accounted for, if you will, on city services that we are able to leverage those dollars for.
I don't ordinarily ask a question I don't already know the answer to, but I'm going to. I meant to look this up before I got here, but the beach preservation fee doesn't have that same kind of you have to spend it in 2 years
Correct.
criteria. Now, the other 1%, the municipal does.
That's right.
The state, if you're using it for beach preservation, does not. I mean, they have a provision where that 2% you could sock away. You don't have to spend all that if you've segregated it out into a beach fund. But the others do.
That's my understanding. I don't think we've done that in the past, but that's certainly an option that the city has.
Okay.
Because
More like a savings account versus this requirement to continue to spend within a 2-year frame.
yes, ma'am. Yeah.
Knowing that you can't do a project every 2 years.
Right, every 2 years,
Correct.
yeah.
Correct.
Or maybe you can. We're getting ready to find out.
Questions, Cindy or Dan, anything? Just trying to level set before we go any deeper. Or anybody here?
Do we
Nothing
think
for me.
Okay, good.
Okay.
I was about to say. Still with us.
And Go ahead, Desiree, sorry.
I just wanted to, and I guess we're talking about funding from previous projects, how we've been able to,
Yeah, we just started with
Okay,
this one,
all
so,
right.
yeah, keep rocking. That's kind of the next page in your, or,
well, before we get
Yeah.
into the 10-year capital plan, I think it's important to understand how the city has been able to pay for some of these large-scale projects in the past. And as you know, you see the history of our beach preservation fee fund. We generate about $1 million, $1.2 million. On average, it's about $1.3 million. The projects that we've had to do in the past have been between 12 and $15 million. And
this is in your packet.
yes, I think it's the last page in your packet. This shows you the breakdown of the last two large projects that the city did in the north end of the island. The first project was about $11 million, and $15 million was the last one we did in 2018. And the city was able to pay for those funds with a combination of funding from the city's beach preservation fund, and in 2008 was just city funds, I believe, a combination of maybe general fund and tourism. We had private contributions. So the private contributions are funds that were assessed by the Waldoons Community Association to Waldoons residents. And the resort, the Waldoons Resort also contributed, and it's included in the private contributions piece. Charleston County in the first project contributed about $900,000. State of South Carolina and FEMA. The FEMA portion has been was available to us in 2018 because the city had two events in 2016 and 2017. And because the city monitors or surveys our beach every year, we are able to account for sand loss after a particular storm event. And because it's considered an engineered beach, because of the projects that we have done and the fact that we monitor every year, we are able to get reimbursement from FEMA for a portion of that sand lost, roughly a 75-25 split. In 2018, the state of South Carolina picked up the 25% local share. They had excess funds, I guess, at the end of their fiscal year, so they reimbursed local municipalities for 25% of the cost of storm impacts.
And Desiree, is the FEMA percentage about the same? I mean, we've only had one event with them, but
75-25. The fact is that the last few events we have been made whole because the state of South Carolina has picked up the local 25% share.
Do we know specifically where the county money came from way back in '08? Was that like a Parks and Recreation? Or was it just like a one-off? Because I know all of our tax bills here, we have, a portion of our taxes go to the Charleston County Parks and Recreation Fund, and I don't know if they were sort of giving some of that back to us for this purpose, or do we know?
I think it was a one-off. We get a pass-through. We get a percentage of we get 20% of the accommodation taxes that the county collects. And that's something, I just want to make sure they're not required by state law to do that. We've received it time over time. I believe it was a one-off and not associated with that pass-through that was then allocated to this project. But I can go back to, this is before my time. So I can just go back in our files and check that project worksheet.
And Desiree, was that I know this is before all of us, but is this a request, do you think, that happened, or was, because they didn't do anything in 2018,
Right,
is
yeah.
kind of
Yeah.
my point. So, and we had 10 years worth of some pretty hefty contributions at the county level, so I'm just curious.
I'm going to say 95% sure that it was a request
Gotcha.
of the city.
Yeah.
My gut is that in 2018, and I was here for that time, but I don't remember if at that time the county said, we give you this money from the Charleston,
Yeah.
the pass through that we don't have to, that kind of treat that as our
Yeah.
contribution.
Gotcha.
We've heard that before too. So another component, I wanted to talk about another component from 2018. You see there, we received roughly $3.9 million from the state of South Carolina. And that came in the form of a grant from SCPRT. In 2018, the state legislature approved a funding mechanism, a one-time funding mechanism of $48 million that was given to the South Carolina Parks and Recreation and Tourism Agency to administer. The city submitted a grant for a portion of those funds for the city's beach renourishment project. The city, I think, requested, or the city's request was much larger than what we received of the $3.9 million that we received. And that was due to the public access component. So in order to be eligible for funding from the state and the federal government, you have to demonstrate that you meet the public access definition from the state. And that is a formula that it's determined by the amount of parking spaces and facilities that you offer to tourists and visitors. And there was a portion of the Wild Dunes project that met that definition, and that was the portion that was closest to the 57th Avenue beach access path. So we received the appropriate percentage based on what we met in terms of the public access definition. But the rest of the project was not eligible for that funding, and that's part of the reason why the projects on the north end in Wild Dunes are heavily subsidized by the private contributions from the residents in Wild Dunes and the resort, which you can see there, came up. It's the largest share of that project. 37% was paid for by private contributions.
Can I ask a question real quick?
Sure.
So based off what you just said, so if we had a project closer to the south end of the island that has much more public access, in theory, we might be able to get more money from the state because of the volume of access?
Yes. Any other project outside of that, when we look at our beachfront management plan,
Yeah.
we, based on the number of parking spaces that the city provides, we far exceed the requirements of the public access clause from the state. So we would therefore be eligible for more beach funding from the state and FEMA.
So depending on how we said, hey, we want to work on this project at this point, you can make a better argument and say, hey, we need more money from the state because the access is greater to the state.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
I think,
So-
I think the important part of what you said is in theory.
In theory, yeah.
It's a true statement.
We would like
But-
8 times the amount we need.
But it's about creating the proper argument and,
Correct.
Yes.
and framing it appropriately to the state.
Correct.
Okay.
I think the challenge from that perspective is that $48 million that the state got in 2018, it's all
It's gone. Yeah.
And
Sure.
the city has continued to advocate for a dedicated funding source from the state to help subsidize, help cover and cost share the cost of these large scale renourishment projects, because we anticipate that cost only going up. Now we're looking, if we were to do the same project we did in 2018, we're probably looking at a $22 million project. And when you look at our beach preservation fee fund generating $1 million, $1.5 million every year, it's just never going to be enough to do the amount of projects. And we can talk a little bit about the 10-year capital plan. Senator Campson has introduced a bill, I think for the second year in a row, to establish a dedicated source of funding generated by an entertainment tax. The city has lobbyists that we work with, and we continue to work along with the South Carolina Beach Advocates group in advocating for the state to embrace a dedicated, whatever it is, but some dedicated and annual contribution that municipalities can count on for at least a portion of these projects, because the beaches are the state beaches, and everybody benefits from it. But what we learn every year after year, is it's not something that is very well embraced by people that are not directly being impacted by. And that's been the challenge and the reason why since 2018 there has not been any allocation for beach renourishment. So right now, the SCPRT fund, the $48 million pot of money is now gone. I believe the governor's budget proposal includes $7 million for this state, which would be great. But if you think about that
could
has
blow
to
through that in
benefit
2 weeks.
benefit the entire state.
We're fighting with everybody else for it.
Correct. So I think that hopefully what this helps illustrate is municipalities are pretty much on their own in trying to couple up money to be able to do not only one project, but have a consistent plan for ongoing renourishment, because we have to treat it like any other maintenance needs, where every other 10 years, the conditions that we've seen in the past year show us that maybe 10 years is not going to be enough to be able to maintain a dry sand beach on the island. Luckily, so far, we have a big chunk of our island has been stable for a long time, but we can't plan for that to be the case. When you look at the conditions at Breach Inlet, it's been stable for a long time and accretional for a long time, and last year we saw that shift. So I think that we wanted just to get a level set of the funding that we get, how we get it, how we funded projects in the past. And I think that the goal of this group is thinking long-term, what kind of funding mechanism, funding structure we need to start embracing and thinking about to ensure we have a sustainable funding source to be able to fund these projects.
And I think you said this early on, but FEMA, which is federal level, obviously only kicks in if there's a named storm
That's
event.
correct.
So,
But, are we addressing the state? Are we pressing them? Because tourism dollars in 2019 came up to $24.4 billion. And that's a lot of money.
about half of it's
Right.
beach. Yeah.
2/3 of it is accounts for beach tourism. People come to South Carolina for the beaches, and that is Myrtle Beach and Charleston and so on. And there's a lot of money in that pie, and I don't think we're getting enough. It says, this was an article, The Access Shore and Beach, and it was written by James Hudson. And he was saying that the beach tourism accounts for 2/3 of tourist spending. And maintaining the beach is critical. Maintaining the beach is critical to maintain our tourism dollars for the whole state that benefits. So for every dollar that is spent on beach renourishment, South Carolina receives $1,200 in economic development. And the federal, state, and local government receives $130 in taxes. So we're not getting our fair share. I mean, people are coming to the beach, and we're left holding the bag, basically, to provide for visitors and so forth. And I think we really need to stress lobbying our state representatives to create a separate department or funds, siphoning off some of this tourism dollars so we can have a readily available funds to renourish our beaches as necessary. Wrightsville Beach, they have a 4-year plan, and they pump it out of an inlet at the end of the island. They pump it back on the beach, and then 4 years later, they pump it back. It's a cycle, but that's budgeted in because they know where the sand is, because it just keeps eroding down to the inlet. And with beach quality sand becoming scarce, I think we could do that here at Breach and up at Dweez, is pump that sand back onto the beach and schedule it so that we know after 4 years, 5 years, we're going to have to do it again. I mean, this is going to be a reoccurring problem. It's not going to go away when we pump 1 million cubic yards of sand on the beach. We've got to have a steady fund that we can dip into and provide for every 4 or 5 years to keep our beaches going.
One thing to keep in mind when we think about having maybe small-scale projects more consistently is the bulk of the cost of these projects is getting a dredge here. And we have seen projects, our projects and other projects that we've studied in the area, where the mobilization cost of the dredge, it's roughly 3, 4, sometimes $5 million just to get the dredge here.
Right.
That's why we've been intentional and strategic about planning for projects to minimize the cost of this mobilization. Because if we were to plan a project every 3 years just to pump a little bit of sand and just be contiguous, that project alone, from the get-go, you're talking about $5 million. So $5 million just to get a dredge here.
Well, that's what I'm saying. We
Every-
need to have a fund that
Yeah.
the state provides us some of that money from that $2 billion or $24 billion worth of revenue that they're generating from tourist dollars.
Yeah.
And, you know, South Carolina only annually spends $3.1 million on beach renourishment, where Florida spends $50 billion. You know, so it's
I think
it's a
that perspective is one that really led to the creation of the Beach Advocates Group, which is it's a group of every coastal community. It's they're meeting with their senators, they're meeting with their lobbyists. We have and they're very much united in pushing that message. And unfortunately, I think that we kind of hear time and time again that the senators and the leaders more than 50 miles away from the coast just don't buy that. They don't see it that way. So I think that's been a consistent push from all of the coastal communities for now at least 10 years.
Yeah, hasn't been for lack of effort. That's for darn sure.
And it's just a hard sell to those in the state that are away from the coast. And they talk creatively about, let's identify every one of them that has a beach house. Let's try to identify every one of them that comes to the beach. Let's, kind of bang them over the head with the economic impact. And that's been happening for 10 or so years. And if anything, I mean, from my personal perspective, the pot of state money, kind of 40 million to now like 7 million for the entire state. So I think it's a great idea, and I think that all of the coastal communities are unified behind that idea, but the implementation just doesn't take hold for whatever reason. They were, this group, this advocate group was talking about maybe we have to travel to them in Greenville, travel to Sumter to make the sales pitch. So there's a lot of effort in trying to make that
Story.
convincing, because I think all of us see it obviously, but they just for whatever reason don't latch on.
but it doesn't seem sustainable for us to keep
No, it's not.
It's not.
to do this. I mean, we're going to go broke here soon.
Well, and that may be the point that the state wakes up, is when all of us along the coast are unable to have dry sand beaches, and it ultimately begins to impact tourism, and we're starting to look at condemnations, involuntary, or, I would hate to think that we'd have to get to that point, but it's on the table,
We'll see
really.
the trickle down when
drastic.
the accommodation tax, the revenue coming in for that is lower, because people aren't booking, or they'll book in the early part, and word will get out that there's no beach access. And so,
Well, and I think that the economic impact, it's not just the people traveling to come to the beach. You think about all the companies that set their foot here because they believe that this is an attractive place to live, and people use that as a recruiting tool. Whether it's here in Charleston or, in the Midlands, having access to healthy beaches is an attraction that not only impacts tourism, but impacts just economic development in the state. And
absolutely.
we fully understand that, but it seems like there is as Douglas was saying earlier, there is a disconnect from people who are not directly impacted here to understand the value and the importance of beaches in the entire state's economy. And how do we get that message across is something that the Beach Advocates Committee group is grappling with, and again, trying to think creatively, because we understand the need, we understand the story, but we're not, I don't think we are, and when I say we, I think the coastal community, we're not being convincing enough, maybe.
Is it, I wasn't able to make the beach advocates meeting, but are our coastal visitors bureaus a part of that? Because they've been pretty convincing worldwide to get people here. I mean, are they people we can leverage, whether it's was it Beaufort, then Charleston, then Horry? I mean, are they in this mix?
Not aware of them.
I'm not aware of them
Being there.
attending the meeting, but certainly they pull a big lever
Yeah,
in
they do.
in talking about the impact of beaches and just overall tourism. So certainly that's a good.
What struck me was on this beach funding, restoration project funding, that Charleston County only gave a one-time $900,000 back in 2008. I think the whole tri-county area should be, contributing to the renourishment fund. Because we get a lot of day trippers in here and they're not getting charged accommodation tax or anything like that, but yet they're enjoying the beach. And, I think it's time now they start ponying up to help us out here. So I don't know how we do that, but that's.
Well, that leads to my question. So we've set aside a 1% tax on accommodations for beach preservation. Is it only coastal communities that touch the beach? Could another adjoining municipality or all the municipalities in Charleston charge the same tax for beach preservation on their hotel accommodations? So someone who's on an interior, 20 miles away, staying at a hotel, but they know they're going to bring their family to the beach, they came here to stay in the Charleston area for exactly that reason. Is there a way to capture accommodations tax from that, for the extension? Because we know we're not housing everybody here. Like, we're capturing that money here, but we know there's someone just across that bridge that's staying at that hotel that's coming to this beach because that hotel is advertising this beach. So, are they allowed to charge that same tax? And allocate the money where it wouldn't change their budget, it wouldn't change that city budget. They're charging it to the tourist that was coming anyway.
Yeah, and I think
Is there a way?
one of the conversations that we can put on the table is a broader tri-county accommodations tax that we may could share in. That's gonna take a lot of cooperation and a lot of effort, but certainly reasonable.
But if every municipality was allowed to authorize to charge the tax, but recognizing what it was going to, but it's really not coming out of their budget, they're transferring the load or the burden to the tourists, which is where it belongs anyways. But then, to your point, Tim, we're capturing the revenue from the hotels that are adjoining outside of our borders, if you will.
And there is an example, there's a model in North Carolina, the county that covers most of the Outer Banks area,
Yeah.
where most of the municipalities within that county are beaches. So it makes sense that they have a county-wide occupancy tax. And of that county-wide occupancy tax, there is a 2% that is dedicated for beach renourishment. And that's levied everywhere on the county, whether it's beachfront or not. So that certainly is a model that we can look at as an example to include some county-wide share.
Yeah,
In-
recognizing that, if it goes Charleston County-wide or something like that, if we advocate for that, the Folly Beach, there's other beaches that are in the mix, but it would create it would cast a larger net, if you will, to get the revenue that we're looking for. And that way, people from Sumter and Richland County and Lexington County aren't going, well, why is my money going down to the beach? While they may come, we recognize the impact, like you said, is tri-county, at this level.
Seems
It
to
could be
be
something to-
easier, a more direct kind of
And,
link to that.
Sure.
Yeah.
and it's a
Versus
better
the
sell
green.
to the constituents of all the areas, right? Like, they can say, look, by doing this tax against tourists, this helps all of us, the day trippers included. They can say, this money that we're collecting from our hotels is helping maintain the beach that you go to with your family too. So it sells two ways.
I guess it would be
If we wanted to advocate something to try and
Start
get,
there for sure.
yeah.
be a vote by every municipality within the county.
Yeah.
Right, to add a percent, they could add 1%, Town of Mount Pleasant, City of Charleston, Charleston County unincorporated. But it seems like the majority of them would be in those cities. I don't know the likelihood of them agreeing to that, but that
Yeah,
would be the,
That's the path.
that would be the path, I think.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think so.
I think it's a reasonable sell, if you will, to tell your neighbors, to tell your friends, to tell people living in the area, this is what what it provides and benefits you
You would think
and
a
ourselves.
$25 billion tourism industry would be a reasonable sell, but
I don't
to
disagree,
elected
but
officials.
people get greedy.
Just to keep us moving, why don't we look at the expected cost over the next few years? And I know this is probably a lowball number at this point, but just to kind of keep us going.
Yes, so you have in front of you our 10-year capital plan. This is our first pass in our budget prep process for FY '25. And here you can see that for capital purchases in FY '25, in FY '24, the city received a grant from SCPRT of $500,000 for the installation of 2 ADA compliant walkovers. We are in the process of designing and engineering those, and construction is scheduled for end of this year, so it'll be an FY '25 expenditure. We have $250,000 for a project where we're working on with the county park here on the island to improve emergency vehicle access to the beach. Right now, our emergency personnel uses the Fifth Avenue beach access path, and as you know, that area is very dynamic. And with the recent erosion, we have steep inclines there that make it harder for vehicles to access the beach. And most of the calls that we have in that area are within the Front Beach District. So having a dedicated access path near the county park, it's just better for emergency response and much better for the beach as well. So we're working with them, and that is that would be an expense to the city. And then we have an ongoing placeholder for replacement of Moby mat, and that's the blue matting you see in some of our ADA compliant beach paths. So that's a $35,000 expense. For beach maintenance, we have $400,000 for the city's contribution to the Army Corps of Engineers project down at Breach Inlet. We anticipate this project being done before we start FY '25. So this is really a placeholder in the event that that project is delayed, it's not the city's project. But if that is delayed, then we wanted to budget what we think our share would be of the city's portion of that work, where we anticipate moving some of the sand that is placed by the Army Corps of Engineers along the shore, along the intertidal zone, up to the dry sand beach and into the dune system. We have, I'm sorry, I missed design and permitting. So right now, Coastal Science and Engineering are under contract with the city to begin the design of what would be the next large project on the north and south end, and also working and coordinating projects for the Breach Inlet end. So that's an expense. That number has to move probably to FY '26, but
The 475.
the 475,
Currently
that's
in 27.
in
should
FY
be in
'27, should be in '26. And then here we have a very high-level estimates of what a large-scale project at Breach Inlet would cost, and what would be the city's cost share for a large-scale project in Wild Dunes. So we use 25%, again, as a placeholder. If you look at the city's contribution in the past for Wild Dunes project, it's an average of 16%. So we're using 25% just as a planning part of our forecast. So the $3,750,000, that would be the city's share of whatever that project would cost, which we anticipate about 15 or 20 million when we get down to it, essentially. Then we have 2 shoal management projects. One is right now we're getting ready to submit a permit for a shoal management project down at the north end. The purpose of those projects, and Stephen talked a little bit about it at your last meeting, is to extend the life of a large-scale project so that you don't have to do $50 million projects every 8 years or 5 years. So that $750,000 is assumes the 100% of the cost. So our next version will include the same funding breakdown that we have had in the past, particularly in Wild Dunes projects. So 750 is the total cost of roughly 100,000 cubic yards of sand mobilization project.
And that's what's anticipated out of the shoal that's making its way
Yes,
to
sir.
shore.
Yes, sir. And then $350 placeholder that we have in the event that, again, the Army Corps project that is mobilizing about 500,000 cubic yards of sand between 2nd and 10th. We don't know how long that sand is going to last. We don't know how well it's going to perform. We are very hopeful, and our engineers believe that it'll be a significant improvement to that area. But we want to have some funds in the event that we have to do a shorter term project if the Army Corps project either doesn't happen or just doesn't last as long as we anticipate. So that's for $350,000. And then we have our ongoing monitoring of the shoreline expense that we do every year. It's less than what we've paid the past 4 years because the city is, after you do a large renourishment project, you're required to monitor the project area differently or more. So that expense ended in FY24. So now we just have the regular ongoing monitoring of the entire 7 miles of shoreline.
And regular, that means annual, or what is that
Annual.
exactly? Okay.
That is currently an annual survey and report that we get from our coastal engineers.
Are there options for more, I mean, I hate to say this because it's just money, but, I mean, are there options for more frequent monitoring at this point in areas that we know are critically,
Yeah, we've talked about that, whether the unstable inlet zones that are determined by the state should maybe have a biannual monitor and report. Certainly, we've been monitoring this end daily for the past, since 2023, but due to the challenges, but as an ongoing plan, should that be the case? And certainly, I think there's an opportunity to evaluate a more frequent monitoring, particularly those areas that are considered unstable.
Dan or Cindy, questions or comments at this point? Don't want to leave you out just because you're not physically here.
Thank you. No, this has been this so far so good. I'm also curious, obviously, about as we move forward, ways that we can decrease our expenses, whether it's working with Sullivan's Island or other municipalities as we bring in, like you talked about the dredge and things like that we consider that. Again, looking long term, if we're going to need something like that, working with other barrier islands, perhaps in some way that cost can be reduced.
Good point. And just, keep in mind, to that point, Folly is managed by the Army Corps, so it really would be Sullivan's, DeWeese.
Edisto, maybe?
Edisto's maybe headed down the Army
Yeah,
Corps
Edisto's
path.
going down the path of becoming a federally funded beach.
They've been hit
And I
pretty
think
hard.
that's something, Mayor, maybe we want to talk about now,
Yeah.
that being an option, of wanting to hear what that option looks like. There's certainly pros and cons to the city partnering with the Army Corps of Engineers in a long-term plan, beach renourishment plan, where they essentially take control over the beach renourishment plan for the entire beach. There's benefits.
That's what Wrightsville Beach has done. That project I was talking about where they dredge it from the inlets is overseen by the Army Corps of Engineers. So they've got it down now where it's every 4 years that they pump it back in. That's their plan.
So part of our conversations with the Corps, which started back in 2022, conceptualizing this idea of using the spoil site sediment, that it's beach compatible to our beaches. And they they've talked to us about being open and being willing to evaluate a long-term plan where every time they come and dredge the intercoastal, they consider basically doing the same thing we're doing at Breach Inlet, but rather than putting it in their spoil site and then coming later and pumping that sand to the beach, doing it all together, doing it at the same time. And we can identify the areas of our beach that need sand and piggyback on that project. And that seems like a very good idea because you're just utilizing what we know it would be beach compatible. But that, I think that there is value in maybe hearing from the Army Corps of Engineers of what it would take for the city to establish an agreement with them for these type of projects, whether it's through getting sand harvested from dredging projects or following the Folly model, Myrtle Beach, and now Edisto, which they essentially, they're federally funded beaches.
So I think, so some of the conversations with Army Corps specifically over the last few months has been, you bring us a proposal and let us see the pros and cons. I don't know if it's been looked at as a city before. So I think, talking about beach funding needs, I mean, I think we could hopefully have them here maybe at a March meeting. I think they're gonna have a presentation ready for us maybe the end of this month, if they stay on track, just for what it would look like to take over for us to become federally funded, just a caveat to that. So instead of fighting the state budget numbers, we're fighting federal, because Army Corps is only funded by federal money, and they're allocated a bucket every year. Again, there's no funding source for them other than somebody stroking a pen, at the Congress level. So while, it's a great idea, and, as beaches are starting to jump in that program, that just dilutes their funds, obviously. I mean, you would obviously think it would make more sense, okay, now we have 5 more beaches, you would increase your budget allocation, but I think that would remain to be seen. Again, at a federal level, that takes it to a whole different spot when we think about fighting
Because I think
state.
the Army Corps is traditionally, or federal, doesn't take the beaches seriously. They don't think that it's a national issue. But the numbers speak for itself. If you look into the national numbers of tourism-related dollars, it's a huge amount of money. And so the money is there. We just have to find a way to persuade them to give us some.
So if I can add one thing, and I like that idea of finding out more about what they will do and what the pros and cons are. And maybe we do that before we approach the state, because then we can be able to tell the state what the issues are going to be if we switch over, and they can evaluate it also. I think that we're going to find embattlement throughout the state with different towns, different cities not wanting to be involved. But at the same time, if the threat is that we could lose control of it, and the cons outweigh the pros, then maybe it's something that we can consider, and maybe that'll be something to push the legislators.
Yeah, and I think it's a good point, Dan. I'm anxious to see what the Army Corps has to say, because I have no idea. I can come up, with the pros and cons in my head, but control is a big piece of it for sure. And a willingness and a hope that, that they will be funded and support accordingly and see the importance in the tourism dollars, but, that remains to be seen, I think.
My
But
opinion,
I think it's a good option.
I'll just offer my opinion before we get too far into it. It's just, the more local it is, the more we're gonna be invested in it, right? So make our wave small as we push out from this municipality. If you think about it that way, where your approach is and how you approach the attack, if you will.
I've also
for
wondered
finding
if
money.
there aren't any, will we have an Army Corps person here?
That's the
Just
plan.
talk to us,
Yeah.
because I've often wondered if there aren't some sort of plan that they could do that's, nobody likes a groin, but, we have unstabilized inlets, what does it take to make them stabilized, or is that even feasible? And if they do become stabilized with one big project at some point, do we then not have these same issues that we fight cyclically? Maybe they're all the same problem, throughout time, but maybe there's some new things that they've found that help people hang on to their sand longer. That isn't necessarily a full takeover, but maybe it's a one-time project that, ultimately helps the whole downflow of the sand. I don't know.
Yeah.
I'd like to talk to them.
Well, I think Fort Mill is up in Maine. they've been fighting erosion on their beach for 50 years. And I think the Army Corps finally now, I guess, took responsibility for it. And they built a spur that came off of their jetty. And that seemed to have helped it a little bit. But the only reason they got that money is, I think it's Susan Collins is their representative up there, pushed for the money to be allocated somehow. She manipulated it. And so they got the federal dollars for that way. So that's, you know, I guess it's just manipulator, convincing people to give us, you know, get the funds set up for us.
Yeah.
I was just going to say that I think it's worth discussing too how other communities, you know, obviously the accommodation tax fund, it's something that makes a lot of sense because it's being paid for by people that come and visit and stay on the island and enjoy having access to a dry, healthy, dry sand beach. Because these projects are so large, sometimes even having county-wide assistance and county-wide accommodations or occupancy taxes, many municipalities still have to increase their own local funding to come up with, you know, 20 million or, you know, whatever the cost of the project is. And what other communities have done is implemented municipal or special tax purpose districts where residents of the island are taxed a certain amount every year that is used to supplement the fund that is paid for by accommodation taxes. And different places have done it different ways. You know, you can establish a different districts along the island where the people that are benefited more directly pay a higher rate, and then that amount goes down as you get farther away from the beach. So that is another example that we know from North Carolina, where the county pays a share, but then the local share from the municipality is generated by that funding mechanism. And that's not something we've ever, that I know of, talked about here on the island. We all know that the city's tax rate is the lowest one in the area, and because we leverage a lot of our costs with tourism dollars, but that would be another option for the city to evaluate whether it's feasible and what that would generate. Just knowing that we're essentially being left by ourselves to figure it out. And whatever we do with other communities or the county, we'll rely on them agreeing to it and passing legislation to establish it. So I just want to think more practically what options we have that are under the city's control to be able to generate enough funding for these projects to become a reality.
And I think there, you know, historically, we've obviously focused the work on the northern end. That northern end had a built-in kind of model of how to collect money privately through the community association. We have never had to do projects, significant projects on the southern end, but I think that we're all of a mindset that that's going to become the new normal. And we just don't have the same structure, community association. So we've been talking a little bit internally about, you know, how to come to the right balance there in terms of private contribution, public contribution. So I think we'll have to give that some thought.
So let's,
Do we have any examples or of other communities who've done that and added that, a special tax
Yes.
on their municipality? Because obviously we're like an Edisto or a Sullivan, and just giving those two is that we aren't hotel heavy like a Myrtle Beach. And so a lot of both the enjoyment and the use is local. And so I'm curious, I think that would, if other communities are doing it, it gives us better leverage or a better way to look at it at least.
yeah. Cindy, there are areas that have done this, and Nags or Outer Banks area is certainly one. I think there's others that we've talked about through the Beach Advocates group. So I think just thinking about next steps, next week we have OCRM and Steve Trainum will be here to talk from a regulatory standpoint. I think they're both lined up, Desiree.
Yes, sir.
So that'll take care of next week. I will not be able to be here next week, but that's gonna be a good one, I think. And then today we've talked, a county, tri-county funding effort. We've talked Army Corps, we've talked a tax district. Elizabeth, I think to your question earlier, I think it'd be beneficial to have an Explore Charleston person here at some point to have that conversation, and because they are a big, powerful lobbying effort. So if we think about next week, if we have OCRM and Steve Trainum here, don't think Army Corps, we could be ready for the next week. So maybe, I don't know, Desiree, if we just thinking about who and kind of next steps, and we've at least identified some options for funding. Most are going to be very long-term conversations and pushes. Tax district maybe a little bit more in our control, but then you think about resident reaction to that one. But Cindy, I think you make a good point, and Andrew, you too, just around keeping it as local as you can. That would certainly do that.
May I
Tax
ask a
district.
Wild Dunes question from
Absolutely.
your, so I think I understand that initially their funding was coming from an assessment on homes back there,
Correct.
on owners. But then did they move to a model, I don't know totally to a model, but to a model where they started assessing sales? That's not an option that's open to a municipality, right? Because we
Correct.
can't do that, okay. I
Well,
just wanted, but
Yeah, so just real quick, so it used to be a 0.5% transfer fee on every transaction in Wild Dunes.
that went straight for beach renourishment, or just generally speaking?
At the 0.5%, I think just went into other reserves at that point. How many years ago? Maybe 5-6 years ago, they changed it to a 1% transfer fee. So it's every transaction in Wild Dunes, there's a 1% additional cost on that. Half of that goes into a beach renourishment fund. So they have a little bit less than we do. I think 6 or 7 million, maybe somewhere in there, that's built up over the years that's been in place. So just like the city, that fund hasn't been around so long since we've had a project of any kind. So I don't, not to speak for the board down there, I don't know what the plan is around assessments, because in the 2018, some of that 2018 number Desiree ran through was individual homeowners were assessed a certain number to pay. So I don't know.
Is that a state legislature question? I mean, can we go to Senator Campson or Representative Bustos and ask about what it takes to get a transfer tax for just the local municipalities? Because to Andrew's point, I mean, people are coming to visit that are, from outside, but if we can't get cooperation from outer municipalities, if we were able to somehow, I mean, even if it was, a 0.5% on
It
every
could be.
sale on this island, I mean, just for beach renourishment, not for, anything else, but, I mean, is that something that the state, because I know we can't do it, but could the state tell us it's okay if we did? Is
And
that
I-
how it works?
I understand that it used to be available to municipalities
Right.
and state
On their
law
own.
changed,
Correct.
and that no longer is the case. So yes, I think it would be a
It would have to come
statutory.
from the state down.
Yes.
We couldn't just,
Because I think it's, if I remember from the Beach Advocates meeting, I think Florida has a real estate transfer fee, and that's how they fund some of their beach numbers. I mean, you think about if you could get something at a state level, I mean, it could be $50 a transaction all across the state for beach renourishment.
even if it was
wouldn't
just
be-
this municipality, even
Yeah.
if it's just.
No, I'm with you.
Yeah, I mean, that's,
Yeah, or
we
it-
sell, there's a lot of transactions out here.
Yeah, or at least the state giving municipalities the
Right.
flexibility to either approve it by vote or referendum. Yeah, that would be a state level effort, but I think a good option.
So reasonable, and I guess Desiree, think about this tax district idea. And would that be Mac or somebody at the firm coming in and having a conversation with us to talk about how and what and parameters?
Yeah, I think it would be a financing conversation of how you structure that, but that would be up to council implementing that.
Right, but just for this committee to get grounded.
We could also talk to a representative from particularly Dare County.
Yeah.
That's how they structure their beach renourishment projects.
That's
And
the Outer Banks.
that's the
crowd,
Outer
yeah.
Banks, and we've talked to the manager there, and he's happy to have a conversation with this committee about what how long it took them to structure that, and how you know, he's from the county, and then each municipality has their own special tax purpose district,
Why don't
essentially.
we, if the committee's okay, what if we look at having him at the next meeting? That'd be March 1st. This person
who?
from Dare County.
Okay, sure.
That would just at least get us grounded in how long it took to have a tax district in place, how they did it, because I think it's graduated, how close you are to the coast on how much you pay. So again, I think, I know I am starting at ground zero on this, so it'd just be nice to get us educated to see what the options are and kind of next steps. So,
And it might also help to have either Mac or like Jeremy, somebody from the bond department, just in case there's a difference between South Carolina procedure and North
Yeah.
Carolina procedure.
and I guess Desiree, I know, you know, maybe either our bond attorneys or our financial advisor could probably opine a bit that we've used for our funding and debt offerings over the years. Is that reasonable from everybody's standpoint, kind of next steps around this tax district and who we get in front of us? And I guess,
So that would be March 1st.
yeah, and again, I don't know that that's a whole hour's worth of conversation. Maybe we can see if Explore Charleston person could come, or just to kind of keep us moving and multiple topics happening. And some of this will just rely on people's schedules, obviously, but reasonable
That sounds good.
Yeah.
steps.
Yeah. Who's going to run the show next week?
Good luck to you people. And I hate to miss, so I have coffee with the mayor last Friday of every month, so I hate to reschedule that. But
Yeah. I understand.
You want to do it?
No, I do
I
not.
saw her flinch. I saw her flinch.
No.
Cindy, Dan, anything parting comments before we wrap?
No, this is really informative. I wish it seemed like an easy solution, but it sounds like this is a great place to start.
Good, thank you. And that was, both these sessions have been great, just from a level setting standpoint. So staff, thank you all. This
You're
has really
welcome.
been very helpful to get everybody on the same page that, and get ideas put up. Dan, anything from you? Or he's gone.
I think we
He's out.
lost Dan.
Dan's out.
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't know he was on an hour timer. I had no idea.
Somebody must have walked into the conference room.
No further business?
I don't think so.
Motion to adjourn, off record at 10:02.